Hi, I'm Mike Schwab, the creator of Ways We Mage and the author of Ways We Enjoy Magic Cards. This is today's free chapter, by the way, and what I'm doing today is some programming on my platform that's going to allow me to make cards into what I call a first-class object so that they can be tagged in articles and potentially also in books. Yesterday, I did a little research on different APIs that can provide me with card images. So this API is quite nicely built, but it only provides images from Gatherer, and those are a little too small and blurry for uh, my goals that I have for this project. Scryfall, they have kind of an independent project of generating images, and the ones that they uh, provide have a higher resolution. So I've decided to use this API. So there's on the top level, there's basically two approaches that I can see to storing this information. One is looking it up as needed. The other is kind of loading it all in advance, because there are still less than 20,000 Magic cards, at least functionally unique ones. If you count all the foil editions and special editions, there's probably more than 20,000, but or about that. But for the purposes of this, which is about discussion and writing, foils and art are slightly less important to the particular features that I envision right now. So I'm focused on just being able to display the card texts, because my site is really kind of an educational focus, slightly more than for people who are already really familiar with the game. So the next question is how to. So I'm going to load all the cards into my database. That's my plan at this point. So how do I do that? And my plan is to use MTG JSON. They provide files that include a lot of this data, and I'll go ahead and I'll grab this one and this one. So my plan is to load the cards into my database using that, and I'm curious about what my plan is going to be when a new set comes out, how I can quickly get those available to authors. So that is going to be probably the second layer of my system. But I'm comfortable with it, with the idea of having two layers. I like the idea of being able to ingest this document, which I trust, rather than having to, like, if I were to bring up a new instance of the database, I would have to fill it with cards in like a process of hitting the API 20,000 times to get all the cards. So there is advantages to having just one layer of a system that works for both cases, but at this point, I'm ready to compromise and make two layers. So looking at this data that's available to me about a single card, I am thinking about whether these individual pieces of data are relevant to the service that I want to provide. Now, for the most part, I think that the service that's important to me now can be accomplished with simply the image I'm going to go ahead and store the name as well, because even if it doesn't end up being a part of my interface, it will be a very important part of my my ability to debug the system. And it may also be a part of the interface that people use to apply tags to their articles and their lists and their books. I am also planning to store this, the multiverse ID, because that will enable me to integrate with other services. And even though I'm not planning to do anything like that yet, I don't mind being a little proactive. I'm going to try to strike the right balance with how much of this data I design up front. And so I've been thinking about, okay, so this is interesting. So this data set gives me a field called type line. This one gives me an actual array, which is a data structure that can hold multiple pieces of information. So for an artifact creature or an enchantment creature, this would have two strings in here, two pieces of information. And this one, I'm guessing, is just going to have one. This type line, furthermore, it looks like it might also be including the supertypes and subtypes. So my plan tentatively was to store the color, type, and converted mana cost. I decided probably don't want to store power and toughness. And again, this is all very speculative. I don't need any of those data to achieve the things I'm trying to achieve right now, but just trying to do kind of a stitch in time that will save 9. I mean, again, it's a close call between just completely deferring this or not, but I think that with regard to the type of the card, the color, and the converted mana cost, those are attributes that I can see building around, kind of on a whim. So I'm ready to at least make an attempt to put them into my data now. And so now what I'm going to do is look at the MTG JSON to see how it structures this type hierarchy. Okay, I already got a copy of this file. This one might be a little bit newer. Okay. Okay, so this one has an array for colors. And, okay, so it has, that's a unglued card, so it has Piglet in there. For type, it has the line. So here's an example of having the type and then the subtypes together, and then here's the data where they are broken out into individual pieces. So this data has the structure that I prefer, and cool that it also has color identity as well as colors. Great. And then in terms of, so what did I say? Color, types, and converted mana cost. So this file will give me all the data that I need. And does it also give me the multiverse ID? No. And it's not giving set information either. Okay, so this is just one instance of every card, regardless of how many times it's been reprinted. So that's cool. So let's think if that is going to work for the features that I want to provide. Just right off the top of my head, my inclination is that I prefer to have the card's functional information be primary, and then the reprint and edition information be secondary. So if I had a need to display many different printings of script sprites, I'd want to have one model that said what the card is, how it works, and another model that then attached to that, which would say what the different editions were. And if the text of the card was different in the different editions, then it could be overridden in that second one. So okay. So looking at my application, the type of script that I use to do repeatable tasks that are kind of administrative is a rake task, which is basically like a script with dependencies. So it's a script that can check to make sure other scripts have run first. So I'll say cards.rake. I think okay. So again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself by saying that ingest is something that I'm going to share with multiple tasks, even though at this point I only have one, but just hopefully save myself a little typing there and don't get in the habit of typing the wrong thing when I run the task. So the first thing to do is open and parse the JSON file. So parsing it will turn it into an object that Ruby can iterate over, taking one element at a time and being able to view in detail all of those fields that are there. And thinking about where to put this file, assets looks like a candidate, but it's actually storing kind of a different class of assets. These are ones that are served to the web, and this asset is only being used locally. I believe it's important to separate code from data and code from configuration. So what I will possibly do is store this file in my project hierarchy but not commit it to the repository. So it might not be there. So okay, so I'll say source file equals file.open rails, and then I can say like file dot or dir.join. Let's see. When I'm joining together the name of a directory with the name of a file, just want to make sure I'm using the right. Okay, look at the class methods here. Yeah, so it's a method on file. Okay. So I can join together the directory names with the file name and come up with the path. File.join rails.root, and then I'm going to put it in config locales, and then the file coming from mtg json is called all cards. So let's see what this all cards with extras is. I'm guessing that includes tokens. Let's see, token, let's see how many times it appears in 3000. Let's see if it appears capitalized. 35. Okay, that just could just be the beginning of a sentence. Okay, it looks like it's possible that the difference between these files is that this one includes the rulings. It includes an image name. And a lot, okay, I'm going around and around here. These rulings are, oh, it includes legalities as well. Okay, great. So that seems to be what that file is providing here. And so I can move this file to my project. take off the 2 so that, oh, and there's no space in that file name. It's just all cards. Okay, and then I can say source data, json.parse source file. And I want to acknowledge that since I'm not putting this into the repository, it might not be present in places where this app is running. Which actually presents a challenge regarding my deployment on Heroku. What I could do there is actually load the file from mtg.json. So I will add some code that will load the file from the remote server. But first what I'm going to do is use this local file to work on parsing the data and putting it into my database. Okay. And then card data name. Types. CMC. Oh. And rather than run through the whole file, I'll just grab the first 200. Oops. To test this out. And then I can say rake cards ingest all. Okay, no implicit conversion of file into string. Okay. So I'm going about this in a different way here. Let's see if that helps at all. Okay, same error message. The line number is line 8. Okay. So I did file.open, but once you open a file, you have to read the file to turn it into a string. Okay, so it said undefined method each for nil. Okay. So the source data probably isn't an array, or is it? It's a hash. Okay, so hashes may not support this numeric index. So for now, I'll just print out one of them and then break after that. No implicit conversion of string into integer. Okay. So this is on line 10 or 11 of my script. So I think what it's doing, okay, so looking at the data that I'm getting from a card. Okay, so each card is going to give me a key and a value. The key is the name of the card, the value is the card data. So I'll say card key. Okay, so now I got some data to print out here. And I think I can go ahead and get this to probably print out the whole file. I mean, that's saying a lot, but no way did it that fast. Thermal navigator. Wow, that's amazing. I was really surprised it went so quick. I wonder how far back my buffer goes here. Oh, it goes all the way back. Oh, so I now have all the data right here flashing before my eyes. Oh, cool. And yeah, with something that's an artifact creature, okay, so this display is a result of the fact that it's a result of the way I printed out the data. Let's see if I can get it to print out a format that makes it clear that those are still in a, there we go, yeah. So this is the, no colors, cool. This is the format that I prefer, having these things separated. So the way that I store that, since if it were a data set where things could be either an artifact or a creature, but not both, then I would probably use an enum to make my storage of that information more efficient. So what that means is basically there's a little lookup table. So it's like 1 for sorcery, 2 for instant, 3 for creature, 4 for artifact. And then my system would do the translation for me, so I never had to look at those raw numbers myself, but the database will be able to use the raw numbers for purposes of efficiency. Since we do have this duplicity, and there's even like, I think you could even have 3, like an enchantment artifact creature. I guess that, I'm not sure if that's been done, but anyway, you can have 2, and I want to make it easy for my system to know that an artifact creature is an artifact. Not to just say artifact creature is a group unto itself only, but that it's also artifact and is also creature. So I could store it as a string, basically like the word artifact, or the words artifact creature, and then have logic that looked at that string to see if those words are present. But I think there might be a tool set already built into Rails that will basically store what's known as a serialized edition of this data. Okay, so now that I'm saying that out loud, I wonder if it actually is going to provide any kind of efficiency in terms of looking things up rapidly, like a database is wont to do. It would be nice if I could have an enum that would take multiple values and store them at the same time. And I could do something called a bit field, which is a technique of using binary numbers to store multiple attributes, which can be either true or false. Yeah, so now that I say this out loud, I think a bit field might actually be the best tool for the job. But I am going to look at the serialization package to see if it has a feature set that's different from what I remember. So I might go to Active Record Basics here, but not sure if that, okay. So let's see if serialize, okay, Active Record serialize. Okay, this says it was deprecated, but that sometimes it means something like this. It was moved to a different class. Serialization. If you have an attribute that needs to be saved to the database as an object and then retrieved as the same object, then specify the name of that attribute using this method. It will be handled automatically. Okay, so what this does is loads it as like a string or some representation but it can be then built out into a more complex object. So this is a flexible tool, but it's not an efficient tool. So let's see, serialize an array of strings, active record 5. Okay, perfect. So this article is over 3 years old, but that's probably okay. Postgres has array column type. He says preferred to JSON. You can store arrays and hashes using serialize. You can specify the class name. This is more explicit and a bit safer. Okay, so that's useful to know. You can use an even neater version called store. This should handle your use case using a built-in method. Okay, so these guys haven't, from what I can see, they haven't addressed my question of whether I can do efficient queries against artifacts and against creatures, or whether those queries would be inefficient because they would have to go through the whole data set and extract every piece. Store gives you a thin wrapper around serialize for the purposes of storing hashes in a single column. It's like a simple key value store baked into your record when you don't care about being able to query that store outside the context of a single record. Okay, I do care. So great, this documentation has gotten a little more practical. Okay, so to be clear, I think this is an awesome tool, and it's definitely great for types of data like this. However, since I have this notion that I want to do an efficient query, which may be wrong, I need to always be vigilant that I'm not getting too far ahead of myself and thinking that So in programming, there's a traditional phrase that says premature optimization is the root of all evil, which basically means if you try to build a system that's extra efficient because you think that you're smart enough to do it, then you might kind of back yourself into a corner. And it is good to write efficient code sometimes. Um, However, when you get to the point where you need that level of performance, there are lots of different paths you can take that approach. And I'm already thinking of some other ones that would enable me to create this kind of query. Like, for example, if I'm searching, okay, so typically to search through your data, you can use the database itself, and the database vendors like Postgres have gotten to the point where they're almost as fast as some of the other traditional indexing uh, approaches. But based on the type of normalization that I believe is most maintainable, I think that doing denormalization outside of the database kind of makes sense. So what I could envision is making a Sphinx index that reads all the data in my database and makes a note of where all the artifacts are. And that way I have all of that. I have all the information I need to make that search in a place where I can get it instantly without having to chunk through all the cards. And at the same time, I haven't polluted my database with any duplication, which can then lead to things being out of sync with each other. So this is probably the easiest implementation for me. Store is saying that it's using a hash, and therefore this is probably the approach. Alternatively, using Bitfield. This is a system that I have used once briefly. And what it does is it uses this binary thing. So this is a on, off, and in binary notation, this is 6, the number 6. So that's what we stored, so the database would see. This is on, off, on, and in binary, this is 5. So that's how you can store 3 attributes in the numbers between 0 and 8 or 0 and 7. And since my database can store probably 200 bits or more per integer, I would be able to store hundreds of attributes in a single integer and query them using this library. So this when I am thinking about implementing this, I feel like it might give me a little more trouble, but I also feel like it's not that onerous that I don't want to attempt it. So let's see how I'm going to be setting. Okay, so I can just call artifact or creature. Okay, so I will be able to take the string that's coming out of that JSON data, downcase it so that there's no capital letters, and then just call that method. So that way That's how I would set the data during this ingest process. Okay. And then that gives me this nice interface. It's like, if it is a creature, or give me all the artifacts. So this looks like the tool for the job. Okay, so the first step is for me to add this tool to my project. Then I use bundler to detect which version of it I need and install it. So it looks like we got version 0.3.19. Then, okay, so the step that I haven't done yet is to actually create a framework for my app to store this data. So my app is going to put these cards in a database table. The table is going to be managed by a model. The model is going to know which attributes the data has and where they're stored. So going along with a model in most of the applications that work like this, there's a controller which enables the user to interact with the model, to do things like create and update. So those are things that are not relevant to my use case because I don't want people to create or update cards. I want to get that from APIs. The controller can also do things like display the card. But I'm not sure if that's relevant to my use case either. What I want it to do is display lists that are about the card or books, chapters that discuss the card. So I'm not sure if I need a controller for this model, although I probably will end up with one. If I don't need it yet, I might do without it. So what I'm going to do is Rails generate model card. I'm trying to think real quick because card, even though we know what that means in a Magic context, it is a pretty generic term. I'm trying to think really fast if there's any danger of me wanting to use this name for anything else. I think it's fine, and I can always change it later if I really need to. Okay, so that's create what's called a migration. And a migration is a file that allows me to edit the structure of my database. Okay, so I've decided that I'm going to store types. Okay, so big int types, t.big int colors, even though there's only 5 or 6 of each. Yeah, I'll just use an integer. It will probably make it a big int anyway. This tool set does a lot of bookkeeping under the hood for me, so I normally don't think that much about the size of the field. I mean, I do think about the difference between string and text. Text is a type of field that allows you to store more than a string does. I just saw I just listened to a podcast from Mark Rosewater with trivia about the longest card name. I think it clocks in under 250 characters, so with the new unset coming out, they might try to top that. And with modern printing technology, they might be able to make a nice long card name. So we'll just make a mental note of that. Now it's on YouTube. You guys can tell me if that happens. And then also going to store the converted mana cost, which is also an integer. Okay, so I normally do not do abbreviations. I think my programming sensibility is telling me to spell this out, so that's what I'm going to do. And so then my card, okay, and then I'm going to also be storing the multiverse ID. And then I'm also going to be storing an image URL. Okay, do I need anything else? So normally when I create a real world application, I end up with a need for an active flag so that I can deactivate things without deleting them. I don't see a need for that yet based on my plans for this feature, so I'm going to forego that for now because this data set is pretty well contained and I'm not going to have people creating their own data. So I feel like I know how this data is going to behave, and I know that it won't need to be deactivated. The only thing that comes to mind is like if I created some kind of a alphabetical or drop-down interface for people who were tagging their content, or even a autocomplete interface, and I wanted to exclude unglued cards, then that might be a situation where I could use active flags to delineate between the cards that were shown and not. But culturally, so this is an interesting point where like the culture of what I'm trying to promote is going to influence the technical decision of what I build. I was a kid when Unglued came out, and I didn't really like it. I didn't really find it that funny, and I wasn't mature enough to see the coolness of it. I know that other people also have that same sort of emotion around it. Now that Unstable is coming out, I'm very sanguine about how much fun that's going to be. And I know it's quite a bit different in terms of the structure of like how weird it is, I think, but since I want to have a positive attitude towards that, I'm going to forego this notion of deactivating, even though it is annoying to me that Han's run is always alphabetically first, but that's why I'm just going to try to stay away from alphabetization as a crutch. So and if I need to, I can just delete that card out of my database. I mean, it's my app after all. That prospect fills me with pleasure. Okay, so I think this seems to be the setup for what I need, and I'll just mention that this system is also going to create an integer called ID, which is an internal ID that will help my system differentiate between all the different cards, and that's going to be what it uses to tag articles with cards, tag lists with cards, and tag paragraphs and chapters with cards. Okay, so now I'm going to run rake db migrate. To run that migration, add the table to my database. Now I'm going to go to the model file. Go into the model file and set up this flag system. Okay, so the one column is going to be types, and the other column is going to be colors. Actually, these are all indented. Okay, so now I guess I will use alphabetization as a crutch here, just to kind of align with the industry standard. Artifact, creature, land, instant is probably alphabetically before land, sorcery, 6, enchantment. I think tribal is a type. And then here I can also go with the industry standard just so that people don't have a problem. Okay, artifact, creature, land, instant, sorcery, enchantment, planeswalker. So let's re-alphabetize this a little bit. That looks correct. Just double check. 8 magic types, tribal. Card types. Artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, land, planeswalker, tribal, sorcery, vanguard, scheme. Okay. So now looking back at my rake task, So I don't use capitalization unless I have to. This is a case where I'm not going to use it. I'm going to downcase the data that's coming out of this file. And I'm going to turn it into, see, okay, so looking at this, oh, you can optionally set the bang methods option to true to also define bang methods. I want to see an example of him setting the data. Like, do I pass it in as a string? Oh no, I pass it in as a symbol. That's almost for sure. Okay, so I think basically what I could do a couple things. I could do card.types equals artifact creature, or I could do card.artifact card.creature. I don't think there's really any advantage to one or the other. So I think this one is slightly simpler. Even though it's not explicitly shown in this group of examples, I'm pretty sure that's how this API works. Yeah, it would be nice if you showed an example of that. Okay, so rather than going each by each, I'm going to go map and map the type into its downcased, and then turn it from a string, which is this green thing with quotes, to a symbol, which is this yellow thing with a colon, by calling intern, which I think means like internalize, because initially in Ruby, symbols were mostly used for internal type stuff. And this is going to just take this and then this is going to be mirror that equals card data colors Okay, so here this says card type instead of color. Since this is only internal to this, I could leave it as card type. It would work exactly the same as if I renamed it, but I prefer to type out what I am passing around because it makes my code easier to search when I'm searching for code that interacts with the color system. Okay, so I'm gonna see what this does. Probably won't work on the first try, but see what happens. Uninitialized constant card. Okay, so this is a good lesson. It's probably something that a lot of people run into and can be a bit of a head scratcher. Now I just defined the model card, so why doesn't it know how to load that? Well, remember how I said rake tasks are like scripts that can have dependencies. They can make sure that other scripts were run first. And the difference between just running the script and making sure that it was run is that sometimes you don't want to run it over and over. You just want to make sure that it was run once. So you might have a bunch of scripts that all rely on the same thing, and rather than everyone making sure that it runs on the spot, they can make sure that it was run already. And this is the solution for this is to use this somewhat bizarre syntax, which indicates that I need to load my application's environment in order to run this task. Okay, undefined method map for nil. Okay, so that may have been for colors. Let's see if that was actually on the correct line for colors. So line 14, yeah. So if a card is colorless, it doesn't have any colors in here. So I'm going to use this to say if this is nil, you don't need to run this. See if that works. Okay, and now I got that same error on line 13. So I'm going to load up my, see how many cards were ingested. Okay, 242. Card.last. Urza's Science Fair project. Okay, looks like types and colors are being nil. It's possible that the interface I presume for setting flags was wrong. I might have to use update flag. Okay, so okay. Rather than setting types, I should be setting artifact equals true, creature equals true. Yeah. And I can see why that makes sense, because overriding this functionality would be, from what I know, that overriding this would be more complex than just adding methods to the API. So we are going to switch back to an each-wise approach here. So card data types dot each do card type. And okay, so now I have to create a method that says artifact equals. So I'm going to start with, yeah, I'm actually just going to replace this variable with something that's calculated right in here. And then for send, the second argument is like that. And then for this one, I can use the exact same code again. I will edit it to refer to color. And it looks like there might be a card with no types. Let's see what comes after Urza's Science Fair project in this file. Ah, there is tokens in here. Name, Pegasus token card, no type. Okay, I want to take a peek at this extra file to see if they have clearer data on the token cards. Layout token name, and yeah, there's no clear data there.